Good morning. How you doing?
Hey, hey, Christopher.
I got in touch with you because I saw this change record on Drupal.org, or it's not really a change record. I guess it's still a discussion topic. It's not an actually resolved issue yet. But I wanted to hear what you thought about it because you know me, I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon and I tend to be a little cynical about
You?
some of these changes. Yes,
What change
exactly.
record are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about, let me look it up and maybe you can find it. It's the Drupal issue 3311365,
Okay.
which is use PHP attributes for route discovery.
So it's in process, but this is a big change. This is something where using PHP attributes to be able to, on our Drupal routes, to define those routes in the PHP as opposed to in a YAML file, which Drupal uses YAML files for configuration for so many items. But here, starting in, well, it depends on when and if this gets committed, we'd be able to define those in the PHP classes as opposed to in their own files.
An attribute, for those who don't know, is a way to notate a class as a property of another class through the comment system with a specific syntax using brackets. And oh, I see Mark's brought it up there on the screen. You can sort of see that you can add these classes as attributes of the class that you're defining. So yeah, I see the point. I get it that often when we're developing, it's frustrating for us to have to switch context between not only different files, but different language syntaxes. So, you know, if I'm working on a controller for a route, it's nice if I actually have my route configuration right above me, right? Just a few
Uh,
lines
you've
above where I'm.
you've just made the case for me. This seems like it's all good, right?
Well, it seems that way. The utility of it begins to diminish once you start working on line 300 of your code or 400 of your code, because then you got to start doing this like vertical split thing on your screen so you can sort of refer back to it. Whereas if it's a separate file, you just switch tabs if you need to quickly refer back to the configuration of your route, which access, like what access level did you set for your route, all of those different parameters that you might need to be able to keep in mind as you're coding. I'm kind of arguing devil's advocate right now. So I hate that phrase, but I'm just going to use it because everybody knows what devil's advocate means. So nice also to be able to make a commit to one single file and it encapsulates your entire change. But I don't really feel like it's that helpful to the developer in general. And I think just for that same reason that once you start writing a complicated class, you're going to have to do a vertical split or you're going to have to figure out some other way to keep in mind what you're working on.
Well, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm already doing a split.
Uh-huh.
I'm already doing a split when I'm working on something like that between the YAML file and the PHP file.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that seems like a question of, well, are you splitting two files? Are you splitting one file? It seems really beneficial to me to be able to pointing someone else to a class or a specific method, or if, I'm looking for something in a class, I can see it all in one spot. I don't need to be like, oh, wait, how is it even configured? How is the route even configured that points to this method? Is there even a route configured that points to this? So discoverability could be huge with this to be, right now, you might open up a class and see a bunch of methods, but not realize, oh, two of the three of these have routes pointed to them and one doesn't. And that informs how the application might be configured. Unless you go currently and open that routing YAML file, if you know to open it, if you think to open it and say, oh, it's pointing not only to this method, but it's configured with this access requirement. It's with this title. So this, I think is, while, maybe not a complete 100% win, there's certainly, I could understand that someone might not prefer this 100% of the time, let's say. To me, this is a slam dunk as far as like doing more good than harm.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I also think about from the perspective of new people coming to Drupal and understanding how a Drupal site is configured, how its routes and classes are configured. This seems much more discoverable from that perspective as well for new and future developers on the platform.
I see your point there because the discoverability will certainly be helped by using a built-in mechanism of PHP as opposed to, I mean, there's a certain way in which I, as a human, it is definitely easier for me to jump into a module, look at their routes file, and I can very quickly see the routes defined by the module. I don't have to open 6 or 7 different classes, different controllers to see what they're doing. I like that. On the other hand, as you were saying, using attributes, actual official PHP attributes in this way does have the advantage of I can already see the kind of third-party tooling or even like verification that like PHP Stand can start verifying your routes, for example, based on the signature of your constructor and all of your logic in your controller. Does it match what you've set up for in your route? There could be all sorts of ways in which now you could actually validate your route configuration and your code vis-a-vis each other in automated tooling ways because it's all built in PHP. It's not this additional construct that we've added in YAML. I think that's a really powerful future-facing feature. Coding styles, like what you or I as a developer will find easier to work with. I mean, I think we're always going to love debating that forever. And we're going to see forums and, Reddit threads and all sorts of stuff where people are talking about, well, if you have 2 monitors, it's not a problem, right? Yeah, well, I work on a laptop. So, and people are going to yell about these things forever. But there's a second consideration. So we've talked about 2 things. One, is it easier to develop, to see and refer to what you're doing while you're working? Second, is there the potential this way of using built-in attributes for future to be developed, maybe already being developed, toolkits for helping validate your routes versus your code? We've talked about those are really compelling things. But what's really interesting is when I look at this issue in Drupal.org, when I look at the first sort of thesis statement of the issue says we should be using modern PHP, should use modern PHP attributes for route discovery a la Symfony. Now, this is a very ideological statement. And so we've talked about the simplicity utility for developers. We've talked about a little bit, hinted at the fact that we can come up with some really cool code validation tools. But the argument here is, A, we should always be using the latest PHP language structures in our Drupal community code, and we should follow Symfony.
Well, that's an interesting way to interpret that, and I don't think you are necessarily wrong, but I would posit it a little bit differently. I would say, what if I asked you if you were creating the routing system in Drupal today with PHP attributes already available and this already, being available, Symfony already working in this way and in the latest versions, PHP attributes being available, would you develop the Drupal routing system from scratch using PHP attributes or using the routing YAML file?
That's a great question, Mark. See, I have to say, I'm partisan towards YAML. It's one of my favorite configuration data loading structures that I have ever come across because it's so clean and so human readable. You can so quickly, it's like, that's one of the advantages of Markdown. It strikes me kind of like that you can read a Markdown document in its original syntax and you can read it.
You won't get any debate from me about Markdown. Yes.
And I feel the same way with YAML. With YAML, I see immediately what is going on and how the data relates to each other. So I am biased in that direction. I love YAML. I love how clear and expressive it is. I know people hate it too. But so what would I design for creating a route system? Some of it's just like, what are you most used to doing? You know what? I think actually, honestly, your question is making me realize I probably would use attributes. If it was something that I had done before to the point where I was like, attributes were a part of my toolbox box that was as easy as using something like a reflector class, other things like that, where you're used to it, what it does. then I would say, yeah, probably I would probably not invent, okay, let's have a dependency on a YAML parser and an other file in another language. So your question is a strong, strong push for me to say, yeah, this is the right direction.
I'm interested to see, as we were about to get on this call, I was looking at some routes in a project that we work on. And one of the first things that I encountered, I converted one very quickly to PHP attributes just to, see what that would look like.
Hmm.
And I immediately ran into something that, I'm sure it will work, but an edge case that I didn't see in the example was there were two routes pointing to the same method. And they were configured differently. So I was like, oh, I wonder how that will
Oh, that's
end up
interesting.
being represented in a PHP attribute. Is it like two completely separate attributes, with the two different, like the entire block, there's two of them, or is there just two routes within this block? That's very interesting to me to see like how that nets out and how you would represent that in a PHP attribute. But it might be a non-issue.
I think that that's really interesting because I'll tell you, reading the documentation on attributes, I never even thought about it. I think it's really smart. This is just a great example of how actual code can explode your thinking, right? It explodes your theories. You say, oh, this is the best way to do something. Then you see actual coding problems, actual implementations, and that theory almost always gets deflated in some way. So I think it's brilliant. And yeah, like, can you add two attributes of the same class to the class? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. This is the first thing I'm gonna do after this call is I'm gonna go find out if you can because
Well, and I'm gonna race you and go add a comment to this issue in the issue queue. And
yeah,
if other people are interested in this, they couldn't possibly be as interested as we are. I can't imagine, but probably there are some. If you're interested in this, again, we'll put the link to the issue below this in the show notes, and you could check it out. The issue that is in progress for Drupal core and its associated draft change record, and let everyone know what you think.
strong opinions are welcome.